Okay, in the last lecture, we talked about how amount of thinking is a really important determinant of which persuasion variables will matter. And in the elaboration likelihood model, they break variables into two different types, and we're going to go through those in this lecture. So there are two general types of persuasion variables, and the idea is that which is persuasive depends on how much a person will think. In other words, when people are thinking a lot, one type of variable is what's going to persuade them, but when people aren't thinking a lot, they can still be persuaded, but it's the other class of variables that's going to be the persuasive set of variables. So let's go through that in a little more detail. So one type of persuasion variable is a peripheral cue. And these are superficial aspects of the message that can encourage attitude change. And this is a low thinking set of variables, which means that when people aren't thinking very closely about your persuasive topic, if they're going to be persuaded, they have to be persuaded by these superficial aspects of the message. They're not going to be persuaded by other things, just these superficial ones. So one kind of peripheral cue is simple positivity or negativity. If you can associate your persuasive claim with an irrelevant liked or disliked variable that will influence people's attitudes when they're not able to think very carefully about your message. So for example, take a look at this advertisement that I just put together. There's an attractive woman, and the persuasive claim is be sure to file your taxes. So the claim here is that filing your taxes is good and important, and I'm not giving you any good reason why this is true, but if you're not able to think very carefully, you might feel the positivity that comes from an attractive woman, and that convinces you that this is a positive idea, that filing your taxes is positive. Another one, take a look at this. I want to convince you that Capstone Family Insurance is a good insurance company, and so I just pair the name of the insurance company with a positive photo of a young child, and that photo is something that people already like, and so, I'm not giving you any reason why Capstone Family Insurance is great, but if you're not able to think very carefully about my claims anyway, all I have to do is kind of put you in a good mood, make you associate my brand with something that you already like. And that will be enough to make you like my brand by association. Okay, there's another class of peripheral cues that are heuristics. If you've taken some of my other psychology courses online, you'll have encountered this term before, but heuristics are just mental rules to make thinking easier. They're kind of like mental shortcuts that if you don't have time to really think through a problem, you use a rule of thumb that helps you reach some final judgment. So, for example, let's say I say drinking Nutriplex smoothies makes you healthy, and apparently that's coming from a doctor, okay? So we have a source that's an expert. This doctor would be an expert in health, and the mental shortcut people use is if an expert says it, it's probably true. Okay, if I don't have time to really think deeply about the claims being made, I can rely on this shortcut of if it comes from an expert, then it's probably trustworthy. And all of a sudden now, I'm believing your claim just because it's coming from an expert. And I don't have to think very much to be persuaded in that way. Another version of this is if I say 101 reasons to drink Nutriplex smoothies, and I list 101 different reasons, regardless how good they are, that might be enough to convince you. Because another mental shortcut people can use is that if there are a lot of reasons for something, then it's probably a good thing. It's probably a compelling set of arguments. And so this is just another shortcut. I don't have time to read through all of them, but it looks like you have 101 of them, so I'm sold. Sign me up. So again, both of these are examples of peripheral cues because they're superficial aspects of the message. They're either not even relevant or just kind of generally related, but they help persuade people by drawing upon these brief mental shortcuts when people aren't able to think very carefully. Now, the other type of persuasion variable is the central arguments of a message. These are the logical reasons given for agreeing with the advocated position. And these are high thinking variables. This is really the meat and content of your persuasive message. These are the reasons you give people, the arguments you make that should be really high quality and persuasive in and of themselves. But they're only going to persuade people who are able to think through your message. So as an example, here are some from research in social psychology. A common topic for research purposes is this senior comprehensive exams. Because a lot of research is done on college students, it's important to find a topic that college students would care about. And this is one where you tell people that your university is thinking of implementing broad comprehensive exams as a graduation requirement. And there are a few standard strong arguments in favor of this and a few standard weak ones. So when you try to convince people that these exams are a good idea, you could say, since comprehensive exams have been introduced at Duke University, student GPA has increased by 31%. At comparable schools, GPA has only increased 8% over the same period. That's a pretty compelling argument, and it's only going to convince someone if they're able to take the time to read it. A weak argument, though, is maybe you say a member of the board of curators has stated publicly that his brother had to take a comprehensive exam while in college, and now he's the manager of a large restaurant. Well, logically, that's not a very strong argument. That's a pretty weak argument. And so researchers will use these different kinds of arguments to test whether people are paying attention to a message or not. Because if they are, then they'll be differently persuaded by these two kinds of arguments. But if they're not paying any attention, these two arguments are equivalently persuasive. It's not going to affect people's persuasion, whether it's a strong or a weak argument, if they're not thinking. Another example, just for fun, is let's say the topic is a brand of a shaving razor. This is research that's been done using this strong argument. For example, the handle is tapered and ribbed to prevent slipping. That's a pretty good quality of the razor. But a weak argument would be it's designed with the bathroom in mind. What does that even mean? I have no idea. Again, though, if people aren't paying any attention to your message, these two arguments will be equivalently persuasive. If an expert says the strong argument or an expert says the weak argument, people will be persuaded just because it's an expert. They're not going to take the time to read the arguments. So in summary, when people are thinking about the message, central arguments are going to be the things that persuade them, and peripheral cues will not matter. So as in the prior example, if people are thinking, they'll be persuaded by the strong arguments, even if they come from a non-credible source, because the arguments themselves are so good. But when people aren't thinking about the message, peripheral cues will persuade them. The expertise stuff will persuade them, but the actual arguments that you give them will not be influential when people aren't thinking about the message. So the lesson here, you should use both types. You never know exactly how much people are going to be thinking. We'll talk later about how you can predict that a little better, but really know that you should use a combination of different types of persuasive variables so that you can maximize your impact.